And welcome to the ATD Virtual Town Hall, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to pause for 1 minute here while everyone joins us for the virtual event. We have a large crowd today, and we want to make sure that everyone hears our instructions. So just give us 1 minute as everyone is able to join us in the event room.
We welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and where you're from and what your role is. And be sure to select the down menu for all panelists and attendees so everybody can see who's here.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and we will proceed with the event. And while fellow attendees join us, again, welcome to the ATD Live Virtual Town Hall, and thank you for joining us. I'm Shauna Davis, and I'm joined by my colleague Susan Adams, and we will be your moderators for this event. In just a few minutes, we will go through just a couple of slides to help you understand what to expect today. But I do want to note that this is designed to be a live event, an opportunity for us to engage with you and to answer your most pressing questions directly. And so we're looking forward to lots of interaction and the opportunity to engage with you today.
A couple of technical reminders. You'll have an opportunity to enter your questions in the question and answer box. We encourage you to put as many questions in there as you like throughout the event today. And also note that if you're having any audio issues, there is an audio box, sort of an up menu that you can select to select your audio settings as needed. We do have a chat area, as many of you are entering in now. You can enter questions in there, but we prefer if you can enter your questions into the Q&A box. That'll help us monitor and manage and making sure we get all the questions answered today.
I'd also like to note that Ms. Talisha Rogers with the ATD team is here as well. Should you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to chat her directly as well, and she'd be happy to assist you with any information that would help you alleviate those problems. Just as we get started, I want to go over a few expectations. One is that this virtual town hall will be recorded, and following this event, we will produce a frequently asked questions document. Give us a day or so to produce that. We want to make sure that we're able to curate everything and follow up with resources so that that is of use to those of you who've registered. All attendees, of course, will receive that follow-up email, which will include the link for the recorded event, as well as that frequently asked questions document. So what to expect and how to engage with us. The moderators will select questions from the Q&A panel and panelists, as Susan has noted. So please, as we go along, I see one question coming in now. Feel free to post your questions there. Up to 2 panelists will provide a response to each question. And so what we will do is we want to make sure with such a large event that we're able to move questions around and answer a variety of questions for you today. So please don't get discouraged if we don't get to your question right away. Chances are we may have several people who have asked that question in multiple forms, and what we will try to do is give an answer to that question, but it may take a moment for us to get there. Also, our ATD chat team will be posting resources in the chat box. So as you ask a question, we answer that question, you may see a resource, a link show up in the chat box as a way to follow up to be helpful with additional information for you.
And just as a friendly reminder, be sure when you enter anything in the chat that you're selecting all attendees or all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see who's here.
All right, so to get us started, for those of you who are joining us in video, you're able to see all of these lovely people. If you're just with us in audio, I just want to take a moment to do some introductions. Your panelists today are a group of ATD leaders, esteemed leaders, and I just want to do a quick introduction. Of course, we have Dr. Karen Stout, who's the president and CEO of Achieving the Dream. We have Tia Plunkett-McQueen, who is our Chief of Staff and Executive Director of Human Resources. Jonathan Uzzini, who is the Director of Teaching and Learning. Nick Mathern, who's our Vice President of K-12 Partnerships. Dr. Joanne Bashford, who is our Leadership Coach. Dr. Lori Flad, who's Director of Holistic Student Supports. Lori Haycock, who is the Senior Advisor for Data and Analytics, of course, myself, and I'm the Executive Director of Holistic Student Supports, and Susan Adams, who is our Lead Instructional Designer. In addition, our ATD chat team also includes a group of esteemed leaders, and in that chat team, providing you with resources today, will be Julia Lawton, who's a Director of Holistic Student Supports, Jennifer Hill-Kelly, who coaches in our areas of data, holistic student supports, and equity, and Dr. Richard Sebastian, who's a Director of Open and Digital Learning. All right, with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Karen Stout for opening remarks.
Thank you, Shauna, and thank you, Achieving the Dream team. It's great to be on this virtual town hall with you and really extending our level of comfort and taking a risk and doing a virtual town hall like this with so many colleagues from across the country participating, faculty, administrators, advisors, librarians, nonprofit partners, some of our coaches, corporate partners, researchers from all across the country. Achieving the Dream, just for a moment, just to define who we are, we have a number of participants who are not ATD colleges. Achieving the Dream is a nonprofit network of primarily community colleges committed to accelerating equitable student outcomes at scale with quality credentials that support student economic and social mobility, but also in turn then strengthen the communities that those students end up supporting. We have about 277 colleges in our network, but our reach and our work supports about 400 community colleges across the country in 44 states and almost 5 million students. We also have networks within networks. So you may know us from our work in open education resources, where we have a network of colleges. You may know us from our work with the tribal colleges and universities, where we have a very active tribal college and university cohort. We have colleges that are in a community of practice around teaching and learning, and colleges that are around a community of practice around holistic student supports. I'm going to offer some opening reflections that hopefully will set my colleagues up for some questions and answers for you. In a conversation with a colleague president in mid-March, and this was before we knew what we now know and what we will know tomorrow or next week or next month or maybe even next fall or spring, I was reminded of a book that shaped my early leadership as president of Montgomery County Community College outside of Philadelphia. A campus like many of yours, this one right now sitting in a COVID-19 hotspot and serving as of late last week as a critical testing site for the community that needs it now more than ever. The book is by poet and writer David White, and it's titled Crossing the Unknown Sea, Work as a Pilgrimage of Identity. And over the years, I've picked up the book to read some of the highlighted sections, but a few weeks ago with my colleagues' reminder, I picked it up and I noticed something that I hadn't noticed before, and it's a poem by Janet Calvin that sits in between the acknowledgements page and the table of contents page. And she writes this: "You have set sail on another ocean, without star or compass, going where argument leads, shattering the certainties of centuries. Indeed, COVID-19 has set us out into another ocean. As a recent headline in the Chronicle captured, ritual, rhythm, community, everything higher ed does best, the coronavirus attacks." Now, what's interesting as I think about community colleges in this time of crisis is that we are not without star or compass. Our students and our communities offer us direction. And while COVID-19 is attacking our communities, it is not attacking what we do best as community colleges, our primary strength, a strength that I spoke 2 weeks ago in the Dream opening plenary. Actually, that seems like it was years ago. A strength that we must leverage now more than ever before, and that strength is our localness. I remember our keynote speaker at DREAM, James Fallows, asserting that community colleges are America's institutions of the moment. Community colleges are America's institutions of the moment because of our localness. And this observation that he made that rings true with me after lots of conversations with colleagues over the last couple of weeks. And he said, in traveling the country and traveling our community colleges, the people working hardest towards solutions, at least among those I've met, are disproportionately at community colleges. So this localness and this hard work towards solutions is at the heart of our current response, and it will be at the heart of our recovery as a sector. I'm proud of the leadership displayed by the colleges on this call, by colleges across the country, and I'm grateful for the work of our sister organizations, the American Association of Community Colleges in particular, who's been working so hard to ensure that we get resources that our students need and that our institutions need to position us for recovery. I've been inspired. Donations of PPE, 3D printing and manufacturing of safety tools, local sites for testing, some of you are preparing campuses for patient support, faculty teaching, and also being on the front lines as nurses and emergency responders, students on the front lines as emergency responders and also learning. Our students as parents and caregivers, our faculty as parents and caregivers, thrust into what are identical conditions, a leveled playing field, so to speak. Student affairs professionals working magic by going universally remote. Emerging supports for our students by us repurposing laptops, our food pantries doing amazing, flexible work, still providing food to our students. And all this inspiration and innovation reminds me, back to the poem, that we are shuttering the certainties of not centuries, but decades. We are all challenged now, whether we want to or not, to anticipate and plan for change rather than hope change will not arrive. And we can anticipate and plan by cataloging the lessons we are learning. I'm deliberate in calling these lessons learning rather than lessons learned, because today, what I say may not be what we think tomorrow, because we're constantly testing because of the fluidity of the current context. But here are a few things that I'm observing in conversations with presidents and leaders across community colleges. First, our students, our learners, are more vulnerable than we even imagined, than what the data has been telling us. Understanding their stories and their intersectionality, not just as a data point, is really essential. And we're working to understand the student experience real time and in new ways. Faculty, with the classroom walls being shattered, have been fully exposed to understanding the student experience in brand new ways. Number two, faculty resiliency and innovation abounds. And it causes me to ask a question: how can we support and sustain our faculty in ways consistent with Achieving the Dream's recent call to move support for teaching and learning into the heart of our student success work, so that we can continue to build on this faculty innovation during recovery? Number three, colleges with strong fundamentals are accelerating their student success work right now. They're scaling the modularization of the traditional semester. Many of our ATD colleges started to offer 8-week sessions, and they're finding that scaling those 8-week sessions and unbundling and busting the 14-week traditional semester is a strong point right now with COVID. We're eliminating placement testing and moving to multiple measures or self-guided placement after a decade of experimentation with placement testing. We're pulling off the Band-Aid for launching new ways to onboard students that once required multiple visits to our campuses. We're adopting new grading systems that ensure rigor, but are offering our students new flexibility. We're moving rapidly to digitize processes. 4, colleges with a strategic intention around distance learning pre-COVID were able to transition faster and smoother. Support for faculty was in place. Centers for Teaching and Learning were already helping faculty. The tools and expectations for the use of learning management systems were in place. And at some of our colleges, students were required as part of their regular experience to take an online course, which helped them then to transition. Number 5, colleges are eager to sustain these changes. So can we use the lessons we're learning to improve the student experience? One president I spoke to last week said she's asking her team to intentionally reflect and journal on what they did pre-COVID, what they're doing during COVID, and what they want to ensure remains post-COVID, so as not to go back to old ways. 6, universal remote services. There's a real opportunity here for improved transformation. It will be hard to go back. It'll be hard for our students to go back to some of the face-to-face set hours that we've used in our institutions. And students will be expecting 24/7 access to tutoring, advising, financial aid support. 7, we're discovering new early momentum metrics, or I should probably call them continuity metrics. We're able to track whether students have moved from face-to-face classes into the online learning environment, whether they're engaging in the LMS, and all of that is really important to understanding loss points for students in this critical semester. 8, we're learning limitations of our shadow systems. Non-credit to credit kinds of structures, organizational structures and systems that connect non-credit and credit are really important, and many of our colleges have struggled with building the same supports for moving non-credit programs into a remote or distance learning formats. Another observation is around financial aid. We need to transition, and our colleges have transitioned from financial aid siloed offices to what I'll call financial service systems of support that connect our financial aid offices with our foundations, that connect our colleges with the community, and offer a broad set of opportunities for student support. And the last observation I have is around inequity. The COVID crisis has certainly amplified what we've been working so hard on as a sector to improve student success results at scale with equity. We'll probably have more questions on this, and we'll have more conversation on this as this moves forward. So, you know, at DREAM, I challenged us to imagine a bolder vision for student success. And COVID does not change that call to action. It just makes that call to action deeper. It colors it in more. It brings more clarity to that call to action, and it makes that call to action more compelling. And that bolder call to action was one that makes completion a progression metric rather than an end goal, one that embodies a new access agenda that reaches deeper into our communities to open new pathways into and through our colleges for our most vulnerable learners, one that moves from a focus on whole college transformation to whole community transformation, one that moves teaching and learning and faculty leadership and engagement and respect from the margins to the center of our redesign efforts, and most importantly, one that authentically centers equity, especially racial equity, in our institutional redesign work. COVID is offering us an opportunity. That star and that compass is that call that I just articulated. So I'm hoping that we will shatter some certainties and begin to adopt at scale post-COVID the things that COVID has required us to engage in as a sector. And with those comments to set the stage, I'm going to turn it back to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stout. Alrighty, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move along to answering your questions. Remember, this is designed to be a live Q&A event. I see some questions and answers coming in. Already some of you have received some answers. Some of those questions, again, we will answer live. Some, such as if you're requesting specifically resources, don't be surprised when you pose that to see someone follow right back up with a list of links or resources. In addition, what I also wanted to note was that during your registration process, many of you all, there were hundreds of questions that were posed at that time as well. And so we want to take an opportunity to incorporate some of those. So you're going to hear questions based on whatever you're asking us live, but also questions that were curated from your registration as well, around distance learning and instructional design, providing virtual student supports, questions on data, faculty engagement instruction, leadership and strategy, as well as organizational strategy, communication strategies, and any other questions that you might have that fall into a category perhaps that I didn't mention. But to get us started, I would like to go ahead and pose our first question. This question will be for Susan Adams. Susan, the question is, now that colleges have moved to distance learning, what should they consider next to improve upon their capacity to teach and support students remotely?
Great question, thank you. As Karen said, we really need to pay extra attention to equity. For example, universal access to affordable broadband is more obviously an equity issue when it's tied to access to education. So more broadly, we know based on a rich body of research that underserved students underperform relative to their peers online. And this is likely even more true in hastily executed remote education. So we need to redouble our efforts to understand their needs and to fill the gaps in our supports for them. But the potential bright spot in this larger crisis, in my mind, is the opportunity to introduce more faculty to both new ways of thinking about their teaching practices, but also closer relationships with expert support staff like instructional designers. And many of us have seen their value is increasing as we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. John, as a follow-up to that question, how might colleges strategically utilize their teaching and learning centers during this time?
Thank you, Shauna. We're getting variations on that question quite a bit, and we heard variations of that during our weekly teaching and learning webinars over the past month. You know, these centers are structured in different ways. I would say probably across the board, they were not designed to be ready for a crisis like this, just like the rest of our institutions. You know, we're not necessarily designed for this, but there are ways that these centers can be relied on in a strategic way right now. The first is to serve as a connector across departments to help one department know that, you know, let's say the math department has come up with some really excellent ways to support their students in self-paced learning and using adaptive technologies. Maybe the English department has come up with some really excellent open educational resources. So that center can be a hub on campus and can help different departments to know what others are doing and to communicate that information across departments and share strategies that are working probably in a much quicker, more efficient way than would normally be possible. I think another important strategy does deal with the role of instructional designers and instructional technologists. At some institutions, people in those roles are already working within their institution's Center for Teaching and Learning. In other institutions, they're housed in separate offices, separate spaces, and faculty are finding they have to go to more than one place to get the support they need right now to be successful in remote teaching. So we would encourage colleges, if instructional designers and instructional technologists are not working in a way that's already seamless with your Center for Teaching and Learning, for the current moment at least, try to bring these supports together in one way that makes it easier for faculty to access them and draws a clearer line for where faculty can go to get the supports they need. Finally, I would say, you know, sometimes faculty developers feel like they've been organized and that their centers have been designed primarily to support face-to-face teaching. And to the extent that that's true, we would encourage you to figure out ways right now to lean into what's happening and to figure out where we can be most helpful to our faculty colleagues. You know, people are dealing with an emergency crisis situation. Faculty may be coming to you with questions you're not accustomed to answering. but this is a really important opportunity to figure out where those answers are. Certainly Achieving the Dream is one place you can look. We have excellent resources available on our website right now. But I think this is an important time to not say, you know, this is a little bit out of my lane, I'm not quite sure what to do. I think it's more important to say, this is not necessarily what I normally do, but I'm going to get the answer for you, or I'm going to build a collaboration with you, and we're going to figure this out together.
Great. Thank you, John.
Susan?
Joanne, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah.
I did want to add just one thing, if I could, please, and that is that I spoke with a college recently who had launched a just-in-time kind of online forum for a community of learners. In other words, to support remote instruction, support online instruction. And so the employees, the faculty, are helping each other come up with some of the answers as well. And I thought that was a really nice example. It's working very well for that college.
That's great. Thank you, Joanne. This next question comes around virtual student supports, and this one's for Lori Flad. Some colleges are training staff who work in other areas to help support student outreach, basic advising, and other wraparound supports. Lori, what strategies can colleges use to prepare college staff for new roles during this time?
Great, thanks, Susan. That's a great question. So I think the good thing, the good news right now is that at a community college, most of us are very accustomed to talking to students and answering their questions. So while these may be new roles, really, it's not anything unusual for us to be answering student questions on a community college campus. So really mobilizing around this, I guess, collective superpower is key to us right now at a time when we can't send students to other offices to get the answers that they need. And we really can't afford to lose them without getting them the help that they need. So I think I've seen colleges do this well. They determine the kind of information that they expect will need to be delivered to students, who will then deliver that information, and ensure that employees are prepared to then deliver that information to students. So for example, I've seen colleges engage their frontline staff to deliver, I guess you might think of it as level 1 sort of basic information on campus closures, deadlines, work studies, summer classes, information that in many instances might be able to be found on the website. But using those frontline folks who are pretty accustomed to being generalists already to reach out to students and provide that type of information. And so colleges that are using this strategy take some extra time and effort to really prepare their employees by creating structures or processes that will help them be effective with the students when they actually engage the students. So for example, I've seen colleges use a script, provide a script to employees as they place these calls to talk to students, provide a list of frequently asked questions that students may be asking, processes, really detailed processes for entering notes and following up with students. And then email templates for following up with students after the call has ended or after the outreach has ended. And then providing the employees themselves with resources where they can go if they need additional help in supporting the student. And I think engaging that frontline staff then frees up your more specialized folks on campus to handle the questions and the issues that are coming in from students. So for example, your financial aid counselors and perhaps your mental health counselors can then, the types of issues that they are best specialized to deal with can then be directed to them. I think the last point I want to make is that all employees can help triage students on a campus and help get them the information that they need. Really, this is an opportunity for us to engage all faculty in reaching out and helping, sort of extending that helping hand to students. So for example, if a student calls in with a question about their password, about their portal perhaps, or their learning management system, and they end up calling the IT support desk, there's no reason why that same person, after they of course handle the issue at hand, resetting the password, just ask a few questions about how the student's doing or if they need any support, and then ensuring that that employee is then prepared and trained behind the scenes to connect the students to the resources that they might need and follow up and close that loop. So I think it's an opportunity all over campus, and we just need to be prepared for it.
Thanks so much, Lori. There's a follow-up question that's related. In what considerations, and this one's for Tia, what considerations should college leaders focus on when redeploying college employees temporarily, or even in longer term for new positions or positions that may require different responsibilities? Tia, can you
That's
take that one?
definitely, yes, sure. That's definitely a great question as well. And when you look at your human resources and redeployment, you're really talking about managing human resources or personnel change quickly and effectively. And I think from a human resources lens, it's important to start with the fundamentals of what is your redeployment policy and making sure that policy is clearly articulated to both your faculty and staff. Secondly, I think it's important to calibrate your staffing plans with an eye for understanding what are the existing skill gaps and vacancies that exist in the current state. And then based on that, understanding how and what resources you will use to close those skill gaps. And that may involve working closely with human resources, your applicant tracking systems or legacy systems to identify the skill sets of your current personnel. And then looking at making decisions for redeployment based on that. I think another component is also understanding what are the immediate training needs that you'll need to be focused on to ensure that staff that are redeployed have the adequate skill sets and training to be effective in their new job roles, whether it's temporary or whether it's long-term.
Thank you, Tia. This next question is a data question, and this is actually similar to a question that's coming in our Q&A. So to the person who posed that, we're going to answer this live right now. It's kind of a two-part, so this is for Lori Haycock. Lori, there's so much activity right now on campuses and lots of good work underway. What data should colleges focus on collecting to help inform longer-term decisions? And the follow-up piece I'll put to that, what data is most helpful right now in terms of colleges really paying attention to what's going on campus right now?
Hey, thanks, Shauna. Well, data is most useful if it's actionable or predictive. So I think it's important for colleges to look at a balanced set of metrics right now. Typically, we've encouraged colleges to focus on early momentum metrics, which research has proven to be the most predictive of college persistence and completion. And those are credit momentum, gateway course momentum, and persistence momentum. Certainly COVID has impacted those, right? So if you're trying to accelerate gateway English and math completion in the first year, and now you've moved your co-recs to online, what impact has that had on students? Karen Stout in her intro remarks mentioned the continuity metrics. Those are right now critically important for colleges as they're trying to finish their spring semester fully online. And we do have an opportunity right now. Typically learning management system metrics have been spotty because there hasn't been campus-wide adoption of the LMS. Primarily they've been used for colleges that are online, but now with COVID, there's robust data set there that you can mine for student engagement and looking at unique logins for each online course, discussion board engagement, course material engagement, and then the opportunity to do outreach if you see that there's low engagement there. We are community colleges, so looking at a set of community metrics is also important. Your COVID rates in your community. Dr. Stout in her opening remarks remarked on the remarkable things that community colleges are doing to support their communities in terms of donations, of PPE, supplies, things like that. Monitoring that, I think, is a metric of good stewardship in your community. Looking at your census participation rates in your area, because that impacts funding for education and congressional district drawings and how you can promote census going. Looking at strategically metrics that can help with decision making for how to spend your CARES funding acts with students and institutionally. And then looking at leading indicators for the fall semester. How many applications are you getting? FAFSA applications, new applications? How many students are re-enrolling from the spring into the fall. So again, I guess a balanced set of metrics is critical at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. I want to turn to a leadership and strategy question that's come in for Dr. Stout. Karen, with so many uncertainties right now, how can college leaders address their immediate needs and keep an eye towards longer-term strategic decisions?
I'm going to offer kind of a 4-point framework to help with that. And the first is, it would be labeled to begin envisioning your future. Many of us are working with our leadership teams right now, and we have full agendas around what's right in front of us. What's happening as we pull the rug up and we see things that we need to address that are very operational. And there's a temptation to stay there and address those things because it's comfortable. So I think our leaders and our leadership teams need to be intentional about dedicating time in our meetings right now to begin thinking about your envisioned future. Be intentional about spending the time to think about what your organization should look like post-crisis. And really beginning to focus on what your students and what your communities will need from you. The second is to develop a strategy to walk back your envisioned future to today. So this is beginning with the end in mind that we tell you as we go through the redesign of your student success work, but for you to begin to define the future and then chart the critical path back from that future. So that you can begin to set some action steps for planning. Now, what I recommend is not to go out too far in the future, but to go to the midterm, which would be, what is your post-crisis focal point? Is your post-crisis focal point right now planning for the fall? Maybe not. Maybe it was when you started and you have to shift it and you're looking at the spring. But beginning to define that and then charting out steps from there to today, and re-engineering your benchmarks and milestones so that you can touch base with where you are using the data that Laurie just described. And by doing that, you'll prioritize the investments you must make now. Many of you are thinking about how you will deploy the dollars from the CARES Act and the dollars from the CARES Act for students. And this exercise, I think, will help you with some of that planning. You also cannot ignore in this step your current strategic plan. What fundamentals of your current strategic plan does this work disrupt or align with, and making sure you're intentional? The third thing is just to be prepared to learn and pivot and to tune into signals so that you can adjust. So getting the student voice front and center, hard right now to do potentially in this remote environment, but I'm seeing many of our colleges continue to use best practices to bring the student voice into their thinking about their design work, and that's very important. And I think having the flexibility to pivot is essential. And the fourth is that we all need to be rallying our teams right now. So in whatever way we can cascade these communication tactics to our teams and make sure that everybody in our college communities feel like they're a part of this work and that they're giving input into the work is really important.
Thank you, Karen. This next question is for you as well. What are your recommendations for scenario development, given kind of the unknown timeline of what's happening around us now? How can colleges build scenarios?
Well, I have a book that I pulled off of my shelf that I use very often. It's called the Decision Book. You can't see it. I tried to hold it up, but I'll put it into the chat if anybody's interested in it. It gives 50 models for strategic thinking, and they're quick models that you can use to try to create a framework to guide you in your scenario planning. At ATD, we are doing a scenario plan where we have looked at 3 different public health scenarios, all calculating, when we may be back to a time when we can be together and gather, even though it may be with social distancing. And then we are running the side by side the implications of each scenario on our operations. Now, for a college, that would mean you'd run those scenarios against the teaching and learning environment, the student experience, your infrastructure, operations, staffing levels, finances. You may even want to use the Achieving the Dream ICAT 7 capacities to think about within that scenario planning. But the important thing is to make this a scenario framework as fluid as possible so that as fundamentals in the public health environment shift and your planning horizon extends, which is really what has been happening over the last couple of weeks, whatever spreadsheet that's behind that scenario plan can be adjusted, including your financial scenario planning behind each of those strategies. We have 3 different scenarios at ATD. We have a best case, worst case, and a moderate case. And I'll tell you, the best case, we're past the best case. So now that's becoming more of a moderate case. And the moderate case has sub cases underneath of it. It becomes very complex. And I'm sure the same happens will be happening for you on a college campus. But the important thing is to have a framework, have assumptions that are part of each of the frameworks that make sense, and that you can communicate in a consistent, rational way to the stakeholders on your campuses. Because right now, that transparent communication and that consistent communication is very, very important, even as the fundamentals in the public health environment are changing.
We wanted to shift over a little bit to our Gateway to College panelist, Nick. Their question came in for you here. At looking at which high schools, with high schools closing, how can colleges keep connections with their early college students?
Thanks, Susan. It's a good question. And one of the things that we want to remind folks is that even during this period, we want to make sure that early college students or any high school students who are taking courses on your campus or at your college are treated with parity of any other college student. We want them to have access to the same services as traditional age students and also encourage them to take advantage of those services. We know that many of those students may still also be connected to a high school, and so they're getting information from 2 sources in terms of what's happening right now with campus closures. And therefore, it's going to be really important to communicate as clearly and consistently as possible with students so they understand what the impact of these closures are for their college career. You want to use every available channel. We know that for many students, especially younger students, email might not be a regular form of communication. And so if you have other communication channels open with students, we encourage you to use those. For students in our Gateway to College network, we know that phone messages and text messages have been very important, both because that is something that is directly connected to students on the regular basis, but also because that's how they communicate personally all of the time. So if you have an opportunity to communicate via phone or text with students, that's a real plus. I think it's also important to recognize the different types of experiences that bring students to an early college or to other dual enrollment programs. And understand that you're going to have to provide different types of responses to different types of student needs. For high achieving students, they might be eager to maintain the momentum that they have before these campus closures came, and they're prepared to keep moving assertively online. They want to earn these credits. They want to maintain their momentum toward their high school graduation and earning college class credits. You also have some students who are doing early college or dual enrollment on your campus because they felt out of place in high schools and they didn't connect socially there, and they may have felt a new sense of belonging and social acceptance on the college campus. And for those students, this is going to be a feeling of real loss for them. In addition, students who may have been struggling and relied on significant supports prior to campus closures may need even more personalized supports right now. Some of them might need a reduced course load. And so that's something to be clear about. I would say that, you've got a difference, or there are certainly many differences between adult students and high school students who are taking college classes. But one difference that I think is important to recognize is that high school students get a much larger percentage of their social needs met at school. And the social element of school is just as important as the academic content for them. But right now, that social element is almost entirely absent from school. So students are supplementing their social needs by taking an even larger dose of social media, as most of us are. And unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily redirect them back to academics that often. So you want to infuse social elements into your connection with students as often as possible. And even if you can do that in the delivery of coursework, I think that's helpful. But you also want to be really clear with students about what the impact of these courses are right now, because some of the high schools are communicating to students that their work will be ungraded this semester. So it's very important that students understand that their college coursework and the impact of their college coursework is determined by the college, not by the high school. And you want to ensure that all faculty teaching college courses to high school students, whether they're your regular college faculty or high school faculty, understand the withdrawal policies that are in place right now. Many states have updated their course withdrawal policies, and in particular, many states have updated their policies around dual enrollment in general. The College and High School Alliance has posted the updated guidance for more than 26 states on their website, and I believe Julia is going to share that link to that website in the chat, and I would encourage you to look at that website to see if your state has updated their guidance around dual enrollment policy during campus closures.
Thank you, Nick. And yes, Julia is posting that, and it's also a good time to just reinforce. Remember that you would like to pose a question to the panelists. Feel free to put that into Q&A and pay attention to the chat, because there are really good resources being posted, and I see some even from some of our participants as well. Wonderful. This next question is going to go to Joanne Bashford. And Joanne, now more than ever, academic affairs and student affairs need to work together. Can you provide some thoughts on practical ways to build more collaborative habits and processes on campus?
Yes, that is an important question, and we know that that's really something that we need to be doing regularly all the time, and are certainly doing even more of now. So the thoughts that I would share about that is that it needs to start from the leadership down, all levels of leadership, from the president on down, that the expectation is that academics and student services do work together, and do work together effectively to address student needs at this time. Everybody is facing challenges. Everybody has a chance, should have a chance to speak together about those challenges and how they would like to face them. So leadership on down, president setting the tone, leadership at all levels setting the tone for collaboration. Then there really needs to be regular convenings, probably topically based, but maybe not so much topically based. I'm thinking back to Karen's scenario planning. A great opportunity for academics and student services to work together is to do some of the scenario planning that she mentioned. You can set a team, convene a group, charge them with looking at not just what the response is now that the colleges are taking, but what they would be doing in the future based on a number of different scenarios. Test out those scenarios, test out what the college could do. Think out of the box. Think, and I hate that term, sorry to use that, but think innovatively, come up with some creative ideas, put everything on the table that you can think of, and make sure that student services and academics are speaking together as they respond to the potential scenarios that the colleges might face. So scenario teams, I think, are an excellent way. A team looking at how are we responding right now, that's cross-functional, student services and academics. Regularly scheduled meetings. The colleges that I'm speaking to right now that seem to be adapting very well under this crisis are ones who already had a strong culture of meeting. They already had a strong culture of collaboration, but even those that don't can start scheduling regular meetings, whether they're weekly, whether they're daily, as I hear some colleges are meeting, to just discuss what are the latest issues that we're seeing in supporting our students remotely. What do we need to do right now to best serve our students? What kind of decisions do we need to make, taking all sides into consideration? So the regularly scheduled meetings, community forums online can help as well. Just like the Just-in-Time forum I mentioned before, repository where folks can post questions and get answers, the same kind of forum can be established for these kinds of decisions. When you see a student challenge, what's the academic perspective on that challenge and the response? What's the student service perspective on that challenge and the response? And bringing it all together into one. So those are some ideas around practical ways to get student services and academic affairs to collaborate. Now's a beautiful time to do it. One other thought, sorry, one more just occurred to me, is that colleges that have guided pathways already established are actually, in my conversations with colleges, seem to be doing better at this than others because they've already established the assigned student services personnel to each of the pathways, and therefore they already have communication lines open for issues that might be coming up. So for those colleges that are not pathways colleges now, they might adopt some of those practices and say, we're gonna assign an advisor to this discipline, to this department. We're gonna assign some student services personnel to be the regular connection to support the work of this academic area. So they can model themselves after the pathways, even if they don't have that in place. I hope that helps.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Joanne. This next question is going to go to Lori Haycock and Joanne. I'm going to pose it to Lori first, and then Joanne, please follow Lori. This question comes out of the Q&A panel, and it says, how can we build fall schedules to be able to pivot in the event of a second wave of contagion with minimal harm to students, faculty, and staff? So I know that's a question that is on everyone's mind, right? So many schools, some have decided to stay on for the summer, and then they're debating about what do we do for the fall.
Yeah, thanks, Shauna. So some colleges are considering offering a more limited section this summer to really use design thinking, put student at the center, and optimize the online learning experience as they move into fall. I think here the scenario planning is important as well as you decide whether you'll be moving fully online in the fall or in the spring. Some colleges are considering later start terms and the use of more compressed like 8-week sessions, because that gives you the flexibility to pivot. And especially if like your local feeder university has a delayed start, you could potentially offer a shorter term online semester early on, and then they could go to the 4-year after that. Some colleges really are reflecting the summer on what worked best this spring and getting the student voice in that, doing pulse surveys through the LMS to say like what works, what challenges do you have, what connectivity issues you have. And we have some sample questions and a question bank on our resource site because that impacts student success, right? Not all students have strong internet stability. Many are sharing with family members. Many don't have the devices that they may need to be able to have a meaningful online. So being able to intervene and support them is a large equity concern because there is a digital divide. So I'll pause there and let Joanne jump in.
Okay, you covered some of what I would have said, and that is I'm seeing colleges opt for shorter schedules. The 8-week is already in place at most colleges, but I'm seeing some that are even going shorter. They're trying to compress into a 4-week schedule. They're looking at different ways to be more flexible about start and end times for the courses with brevity and abbreviated schedules. Want the same learning taking place, but abbreviated schedules. And I think some of the ways they do that is by looking at the competencies. What do they expect? Looking at the outcomes. What do they expect students to know at the end of the course, rather than what content do they have to cover in the 8 weeks that comes from the book and so on. But what are the essential competencies that students need to master? And sometimes it's easier to find a way to offer a course in a compressed schedule if you focus on that. And so some of the more innovative colleges, I think, are doing that. They're also taking a look at what are the critical courses that we're going to need to offer no matter what. What do we have to offer, and prioritize them for support for instruction if it does not have to shift to online. So if, worst case, they do have to suddenly shift to online, how do they do that? Are they best prepared because they've already done some of the legwork for some of those critical courses that they know students need? And in particular, the graduation requirements. Some colleges are taking a really close look at what are the courses that students need to graduate from specific programs? Are they capstone courses? Could they be done in a different way? Could they be done, if need be, as a project-based assignment where students demonstrate that they've learned what they needed to know through that course? So they have a backup plan. So I would suggest that the shorter courses, the plan Bs for the critical courses that students need to complete, and then a competency-based focus, I think would serve college as well at this juncture.
Thank you. This next question is going to go to Karen. This is coming out of our Q&A. How much concern is there about decreasing state budgets and less support for community colleges when we are needed most to help vulnerable populations and people return to work? Any suggestions for resources to fill these gaps?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I have any answers right now on that one. I do know that we're all very concerned about the pressures on the state budgets, and for community colleges that also have local support, the double whammy of state cuts and local cuts. I know that some of our states are already facing some, in this fiscal year, some pullbacks, and are anticipating some pullbacks next year. The other thing to think about, and I think Matt Reed wrote about this in Inside Higher Ed this morning or Friday. I'm not sure when. Matt, you're, I think, on our webinar today about not just the state drops in funding and the local drops, but the summer that's upon us. Many of our colleges rely on auxiliary kind of revenue from summer camps and all types of things that hosting other organizations on our campus, hosting our university partners on our campus, things that we just will not be able to do. So filling those gaps will be a definite challenge. We may want to talk a little bit about philanthropy and where philanthropy is going locally, regionally, and nationally right now, and the voice of community colleges that we need to elevate and amplify at this point in time. And we're probably also going to be looking at ways that we can preserve what we need the most in recovery and invest in that. And it's possible that for some of our community colleges, there will be some things that we will just not be able to do until the recovery is back. Of course, there's, I think this recovery will be much different than the recovery of the Great Recession, and even in reading, the recovery from the Great Depression, and what happened to us after World War II. So there's really no, as I said, this is a new ocean, and we are really crossing an unknown sea.
And Karen, as a follow-up to that question, and fully acknowledging your point about there's a lot of unknowns here, just following up, there was a question posed as well about, could you give some insight, maybe from a campus or college perspective, about the types of what institutions might need from philanthropic partners right now?
First of all, I want to talk a little bit about how well-positioned community colleges are as a sector, or not, to have strong private fundraising efforts. Most of our community colleges across the country have small foundations, and they are not built to do large-scale fundraising. Some of our larger colleges have had very successful capital campaigns. Some of our small rural community colleges don't have development offices to really even begin to connect with philanthropic partners. So, that's a big strategic gap for our community colleges if we're going to use philanthropy strategically for recovery. I would ask our philanthropic partners to, especially those that are local and community-based, more regional, to think about their local community college. Number one, we need to make sure that we are making those connections as institutions with those funders. And if they have existing relationships, to think about flexibility in their grant making, unrestricted dollars rather than specific designated support, so that the institutions have the flexibility to move those dollars where they're needed most. And if they have been investing at a good pace over the last couple of years, I ask that those philanthropic partners stay the course and deepen their investments in areas around student success to really help the colleges be positioned to respond locally. And that's really important for our rural community colleges. The other thing I would ask our philanthropic partners to do, and I'm not sure how well positioned the colleges are to catalyze this, but especially local philanthropy and regional philanthropy to begin to work collaboratively on an agenda to support recovery, with the community college being at the center of that recovery strategy.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to pose this next question to John, perhaps Joanne, you could do also a kind of another lens to answering this question. And this is coming from our Q&A. How do you think this experience will impact the future conversations on the issue of class sizes and full-time faculty teaching load commitments? And everyone could jump in there.
So thank you, Shauna. I think there's a couple of ways to think about that. I think when we think about faculty workload commitments, we're hearing from colleges right now that are trying to think about how they might prepare, first and foremost, how they will prepare for the summer and the possibility of an online fall. And there's a lot to think about for colleges that have faculty who are technically off contract during the summer. Colleges need to begin making arrangements now to think about how they can support the very important work faculty may need to do this summer to redesign courses to be fully online for the fall, which is not to say that that is where we'll wind up, but that's planning that needs to happen since that possibility is out there. And we know that the sort of emergency remote teaching that we've engaged in for the past several weeks is ideally not what we would be offering our students come fall if we have the benefit of a summer to really go through a more thoughtful design process. So people who have in the past, before this emergency, designed courses to be taught online know that if you go through a process of 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, you can do amazing work with the support of a skilled instructional designer to create, really optimal learning experiences for your students in fully online courses. But of course, that's not what we were able to do over the past several weeks. So as we think about faculty workload and support for faculty, I think we have to be thinking about what is involved if faculty do need to redesign a full slate of courses to be taught well in an online environment this fall, not just getting through an emergency as we are right now today, but supporting our students, as fully as we would hope to if we were in a face-to-face environment with them. There's also the piece of the question you just asked around class sizes. I wonder if Joanne has a take on that.
That's a tough question. I think I would respond by saying that we're learning as we go here, aren't we? And I believe that the faculty have been incredible at the colleges with which I've spoken. I've been incredible at stepping up and doing what needed to be done right away, and will do what needs to be done. As you said, John, if we need to shift, if they need to shift to really designing quality online courses to be offered in the future. So kudos to the faculty. I have so much respect for the work that they're doing. And I think there's often a misconception that teaching online is easier, is less intrusive, is more flexible, and maybe it is some of those things, but it is a whole lot of work. And I think that looking at class size, where the colleges are going to need to work with the faculty to determine what is the right class size, what is an appropriate full-time teaching load if they do move to online instruction as a predominant method of course delivery. And maybe, they don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There are colleges that have been doing online instruction as a significant part of their work up till now that they could learn from and look to for some guidance on that. But I think that is, it's going to be for each college to figure out and each faculty to determine what's going to be best.
Okay.
I have heard of from some presidents that they are in constant conversation with faculty on adjusting course sizes, and they're trying to agree on a methodology to have that review be on a regular basis and what the criteria for fairness and equity would be across a number of courses in different disciplines. So, you know, I know that that is an active part of the conversation right now at a number of our colleges as they move through their scenario planning. So it's a very important question.
Shauna, can I just also add that when we think about, I guess, another variable around class size, also maybe length of term may be impacted by that as well. It, you know, it might not be as ideal to have as large of a class size in a shorter term where you're turning around graded work faster. So that might be a variable as well that gets considered when we think about that.
And I do see that there was, yes, and I saw someone else also posted in there and noted, one of our participants noted that class size depends on the subject and the amount of individual response necessary to teach and lots of different variables. And I think that's exactly what you were getting at there. Thank you. I'd like to go to another question. There's some really good questions coming in. This question in particular, so I'm going to throw this out there to, let's see, Karen, I'm going to throw this to you. I think I know the answer to this, though. This may be a quick one for you. But the question is, have you heard anything about lowering tuition costs for fall if the courses
and I did quickly put something in the chat. I've not heard any of the community colleges talk specifically about lowering tuition for the fall. I have read about some of our community colleges that are being innovative with summer and the way that they're structuring some of the summer options around taking 2 classes for 1, or so there's some creativity with summer. I don't know if that will extend into the fall or not. You know, I think that is a tough decision for our colleges in a time when we really are when we know the economic climate for us is not good in the short term, and many of our colleges are dependent on student tuition as a primary revenue source, even though that's not the way we were originally designed as a sector. So the economics of that kind of decision don't fully work out for organizational sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And I want to go to, the time is moving fast here. I wanted to go to, there's a couple more in here. I want to make sure that we get to live. Let's see, let's go to this question here. And this question in particular, I'd like to pose this to Lori Haycock and Lori Flad. So we got a double Lori on this one. This one in particular, Lori, I'm going to ask you from a data standpoint. Lori H, I'm going to ask you from a data standpoint, and then Lori Flatt, I'd want you to reflect on the types of services, student services that can be offered remotely. Okay, so the first question from the data standpoint is, how are schools assessing virtual student services effectiveness? Any thoughts on, you know, how they might determine whether or not the services, we can make them available remotely? How do we know if they're effective, or what are the things we should be looking for if we're going to try to evaluate the effectiveness of those services? And then Lori Flad, the second part to that is if you could just spend a couple of minutes and talk about some of the student services that we should be looking to make sure that are offered remotely. Certainly, we would like all of them to be. So, but thinking about maybe some of the ones that are not as frequently talked about as much as advising.
Thanks, Shauna. I think in addition to the effectiveness, the number of tracking the number of contacts is important also. So how many faculty and advising contacts has a student had who's in this online environment, and again, getting the student voice, like hearing also from faculty and advisors what worked well from their perspective, what challenges they saw, but also getting that from the students. Did they see a value add from those sessions? What did they like about them, and what else could be improved, or what challenge did they have? And to spend the summer kind of reflecting on that and building that into improving those services in the future. And now, because of COVID, there's a demand for further services like online internships and virtual communities of practice and campus clubs and engagement activities for students. So how do you create that meaningful engagement activity? Because we know engagement is so critical for retaining students, is really important. And I think also looking at the times when those online services are offered, because students in this many are working online, working remotely, trying to care for their children at home, maybe caring for elderly family members. So sometimes asynchronous, versus synchronous, and how do you balance that up and just make sure those resources are available when the students need them.
And Lori Hickok, one of the things I'd like to just do a follow-up to that. One of the things that we're seeing and that we're asked as we're working with colleges in the field is around this idea that we made it available, right? And then how do we know if students are doing well? You mentioned, some of the challenges that students might be having, but I wondered if you could also just kind of follow up to that one. If colleges weren't tracking the effectiveness of their services or supports, and they were thinking towards going forward, what sorts of things should we be looking for in the long term? Because there's one thing to make it available immediately, and there's another thing to make sure that help is helpful. Right. And
right.
Actually
and it's intentional and yes, a true value add. So I think co-requisites is a great example, right? So if you're moving those virtually, how do you embed supports into those classes and looking at course success, right? And course retention, were they successful in retaining students through the end of the class? Did they have higher grades? And looking at some of those, again, early momentum course success metrics is important. And oftentimes it's not one single thing, it's a combination of supports. So it's the online advising plus the embedded supports plus the online tutoring, and looking at those in aggregate and the collective impact of those on student success.
Thank you. And then I'd like to turn over to Lori Flagg.
So when I think about the types of student supports that should be focused on in a remote environment, that is what I'm supposed to be focusing on, correct, Shauna? We think of things like online advising. I think that's fairly standard, but things like counseling and financial aid assistance and, even your basic needs. How can you, in a virtual format, create accessibility and connection to things for our supports for our students to meet things like food insecurity, housing insecurity? Is there something on campus that you can continue to run, but embed some of these accessibilities and connection points in an online environment for students so they have access to it? I think of things like career services. How can we help students, especially at the beginning, to choose best fit types of programs for them, and then continue with them through their journey with us, right up until the time they finish, to make sure they're prepared to go out into the workforce and be prepared to, secure the jobs that are going to, in the communities. And then I also, as I work with some of my colleges, I work with quite a few colleges in Arkansas, and I think of some of their, they have career pathways in TRIO and those types of programs that focus on specific populations like student parents and things like that, and keeping those types of supports available by embedding accessibility virtually, either through outreach or allowing students to reach for help through the website or certain links embedded in the websites for the colleges. So I think, and Lori mentioned student life and that sense of belonging. And I've seen colleges take, I don't know if this is the right term, but sort of themed groups for students, like a support group for student parents online, and setting up a space for those parents to connect so they feel more connected to their college and less alone as they work through this crisis.
Thank you. And I'm going to pose one more question here, and this one goes to Tia. And this is one that came out of, was asked several times in the, as individuals were registering. And this one is, can you share how do you recommend balancing keeping our students first, supporting our students, but also avoiding staff burnout? Because we've talked a lot about redeploying people, rapidly learning, and in many ways, our faculty and our staff they're becoming rapid responders, and they're becoming learners, and they're flying the plane and building the wings as they go along. So could you talk just a little bit about how do we ensure that the people that we need to be available and fresh and engaged to support our students, how do we keep from burning them out?
Absolutely, and it's an important question. Definitely in this environment, it's important to maintain open communication with your staff up and down and across the organization. It's important for managers to make sure that they have self-care check-ins with their personnel, just to touch base to understand what's going on. How can they be supported as employees? I have noticed as a practice within ATD that we do that, and we are, again, encouraging our managers to reach out, do those self-care check-ins to make sure everyone's okay. And it's through those conversations that you can learn and assess whether or not somebody may need to take time off, block off their calendar to focus on family, work-life balance, or perhaps take a couple of days off. So it's really important that we stay attuned in terms of making sure staff don't get burnout. Working in a remote environment can be challenging, particularly for those staff that have families and children. So we have to be sensitive, we have to be flexible, and we have to be, definitely empathetic in terms of meeting the needs of our workforce to ensure that they stay motivated and that they, again, are taking care of themselves.
Thank you so much. Tia. And actually, Nick, I want to give you one last question here as well, as we're kind of coming together. We've talked a lot about communicating with students, and I do want to know, question came up quite a bit as well. If you could just give us a couple of thoughts on the appropriate amount of communication with students. There's this idea of wanting to give them everything, but not to the point at which they start to feel overwhelmed or feel like we're spamming them at the same time. So what might be an appropriate amount of communication with students at this time?
That's a good question. And truthfully, we're going to all be a lot smarter 6 months from now. I did see one of the comments about the concern about overwhelming students, and I think that we are seeing for our programs that have a very personalized relationship with students, we're getting some early indications about what content they're responding to and what they're not. And the massive emails or the frequent email messages that have updates about the programming or updates about multiple modes of accessing academic content, unfortunately, are not getting read. And that's probably not a surprise. On the other hand, I think that this lack of connection that people are feeling is a challenge. And if we can respond to that through some type of personalized connections, that's really terrific. If you've got programs on your campus that are specifically designed to serve first generation students, or if you've got a first year seminar for special populations, students who have struggled, if you've got staff who can organize some of their time to pay attention to who is attending class, that is, who is logging on, and then make a response to attendance. We've got some programs that are texting every student every day. Just a hello, how are you doing? Not expecting a response, not necessarily, a long thing, but something short that reminds them that you've got someone on the campus or on the virtual campus who's still looking out for you throughout this. And then once in a while, if you're not getting contact with people, having some additional outreach. But I think that the point is, short personalized messages you want to do as frequently as you're able to do. Longer messages that are really content rich, I think are best probably delivered with a link in a text message rather than an email message, and maybe save those for once a week or once every so often.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, was there a follow-up to that?
I just wanted to add on to what Nick said. And, I think this is a good time for us to use all of the modalities that we have available to us as we communicate, because what reaches one student might not reach another student. So things like social media, texting, Nick already mentioned that. It's a great way. So really trying to be strategic and creative about how we reach out to our students, because and what's appropriate for those modalities, because you might get the message across in different ways to different students.
Thank you so much, Lori. And this time, I have to tell you this time, maybe it was just me, the time seemed like it moved really fast. We're coming up on the hour here for a 90-minute live event. I do want to acknowledge again, because we are so thankful that over 400 of you were able to join us today. We did curate all of the questions that were asked live as well as those that were asked during the registration process. So if we did not get a chance to answer a question that you wanted to answer to, please hold tight and give us a couple of days and we will be sending out a frequently asked questions document and some of those resource links. So if you didn't capture them as the ATD team was posting those resource links, we will follow up with the curated list of resources for you. So I did want to do that. What we'd like to do in the last couple of minutes here, Dr. Stout is going to give us some closing remarks. What I first want to do is turn it over to our co-moderator, and Susan is going to give us some updates and some reminders, and then we're going to turn to Dr. Stout for some closing remarks and a resource page.
Great. So appreciative of all the questions that have come in. We're looking forward to following up on those that we missed. We have 2 webinars coming up, one next week on helping students navigate financial aid amid COVID. So we welcome you to join us for that piece of information. And on May 7th, we're going to have a webinar on college success for single mothers. And there's also a list of other virtual events and meetings there, and we'll be sending out this slide deck to you after this meeting.
It's Dr. Stout.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan, for sharing that. I just have a couple of closing observations, and some of this is informed by the conversation. I think if there were ever a time for us to, and I'll use this phrase, and I won't say think out of the box, I'm going to say think outside the building. If there were ever a time for us to think outside the building and be more aware as a sector of our wider system, it's now. And this gets back to my early theme about leveraging our localness and stretching what we think about localness as leaders and as faculty and administrators on our campuses. Because it's clear, this pandemic makes it clear that we are major problem solvers inside our communities, and that it is important for us as leaders and as academic citizens to understand things that maybe we never thought about trying to understand before. The adequacy of the public health system in our communities, for example. The disparities in our communities in access to healthcare. The availability or not of emergency childcare. The universal, whether there's universal broadband and internet access. And I know in our tribal colleges, in their communities, as many as 35% of their students do not have access to broadband. And generally in the general population, it's 8%. So you think about those disparities. And those are lateral kind of competencies that we often, while we're sitting in the middle of our communities, we often don't find the time to learn about. And I'm thinking about that too from a presidential perspective, because that means we have to move beyond where we've been comfortable in seeking support in the past. So that's one observation. The second is about leadership, and this is leadership all across our organizations. Leadership that moves our organizations constantly into a learning zone, rather than staying in a comfort zone or moving into a panic zone. COVID has put many of us in shock. It's moved our organizations into a panic zone. As leaders, we are compelled to help our organizations move from the panic zone into the learning zone, and that's not easy. Most of the time when you go into a panic zone, you want to go back to a comfort zone and hunker in. We cannot as a sector afford to do that post-COVID. We have to stay in this learning zone. So very often I talk about this student success work and leadership requiring patience and urgency. But I hear, I can feel how COVID has pressed down on us. And so I'm changing that right now to be patience and pace. Doesn't mean that we don't keep that star and compass in front of us, but patience and pace, because this requires stamina. It requires stamina from everyone in our organizations so that we don't risk burnout, and so that our students when we get back to what will be quote unquote the new normal, we're able to serve our students with the same kind of energy and resilience and passion that we're serving them now. So, you know, I think we are shattering certainties, back to the opening poem. And I go back to something that we didn't talk about today, and that is the recent letter on credit acceptance that many of our higher ed organizations have signed. And it's really a monumental thing, being signed by our colleagues across sectors and asking for flexibility on credit acceptance. And that letter says, our current situation is unique and not well served by policies and practices that seemed appropriate even weeks ago. Yep, that's what this is about. This is about breaking down those barriers, those structural barriers, policies and practices that Achieving the Dream's been working to break down for the last decade, hoping that we can build communities with stronger educational outcomes, and we can eradicate equity gaps that are so systematic in the work that we do. So with that, I just want to thank everyone that took the time to come into the call. 90 minutes virtual town hall team, you did a great job. We definitely moved outside of our comfort zone. We learned a lot today. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. And so what we'd like to do is provide, there's a slide here, and I think Susan's going to give you some instructions before you log off.
If you have any other questions that didn't get answered today, or any thoughts or questions that you have for us, feel free to email atdwebinars@achievingthedream.org, and we'll be sure to get back to you. And again, we thank you so much for your time and attention today.
Thank you all. Have a great afternoon, evening, morning. You're in different time zones around the world now, looking at where everyone's coming in. Bye-bye.